When I was getting ready last night, I had one of these visions that everybody would get up and walk out. So I'm so glad that you've all decided to stay and listen to my little story, so thank you. So after listening to the morning's program, I'm still fundamentally aware of how fragile my own voice is in this space and how I still don't resonate with the term carer and with my own role and my own life's experience as a carer. So I use the term in my presentation, a care-based relationship, and you'll notice that, and it's a specific thing because, like many of people have already said, the word carer didn't speak to me, and I didn't fit in any of the siloed service provisions when I was supporting my husband through his disability, living with disability, and his end-of-life care. So I'm sure you must be wondering then, what has dancing got to do with caring? Well, in all honesty, it began as a bit of a joke to myself because I couldn't find the words to articulate what it was that I was doing that was different to everybody else. It became a way for me to describe my role as a spouse in a carer-based relationship. Like many of us, it took me a really long time to acknowledge that I was a carer. I found the tensions between dependency and independency problematic in describing my relationship with my husband, Simon. After all, and so eloquently asked by a staff member at Centrelink when I finally took the step of applying for that carer's allowance, well, what do you do that is different from what a wife would normally do? I didn't know how to answer that. It's only as I look back over time now and through the research and advocacy of others in this space that I'm some way further along to actually understanding that. So by sharing some of my story, how my carer's dance began and how it is now ending, I hope to shed light on some of these complex intersections and provide a framework, a big picture, for managing and strengthening carer wellbeing. My view is that carer wellbeing is not all about taking time for yourself when there is no time, or attending yoga or doing a meditation, squeezing it in and hoping that nothing happens whilst you're away. Although these things are good for you and do connect you socially, I believe that the need to take more of a social view, that well-being is a concept that is embedded in the broader social and community structures which directly impact on how you feel about yourself and your life. Carer well-being is part of a bigger dance. It is not just carers doing the best they can with not much. It is about finding a language to articulate the steps of the dance that we all share in. By the end of this presentation, my hope is that carers here and listening in from the regions can see the steps of your own carer's dance as you move in and out of the various experiences that is caring. I hope it is a useful method to articulate this to others so you can be seen, heard and supported. My hope is that service providers and policymakers will see with greater clarity the spaces where they can provide increased support and provide a stronger foundation for interdependent, care-based relationships that foster a broader sense of individual and community well-being. I can't talk about being a carer without talking about my now late husband, Simon. Simon suffered a catastrophic spinal cord injury, the result of a road accident. He was a vibrant young 24-year-old PE teacher and a state-level triathlete. He was riding his bike to work when a distracted driver of a four-wheel drive turned in front of his path, changing the course of his life forever. He was 24. I think I just said that. From that time, back in 1994, he lived with complete paralysis from T1 and incomplete movement and function from C5. So for those who don't understand spinal cord injury, I'm sure you probably all do, but T1 complete is from the nipple line down, no movement, no feeling. And then C5 was incomplete, so he had some feeling in his hands and some feeling, he could feel parts of his face. So he was incomplete quadriplegic from C5 up, complete from down. In his first year of injury while still living at Paraquat in Shenton Park, he was unlucky enough then to develop a secondary condition called a syrinx, a build-up of cerebral spinal fluid in the cause, causing more damage and a slow, cruel worsening of his already profound disabilities over time. He lived with this ticking time bomb. never knowing when it would advance and take more of his abilities away, and he lived with chronic, daily and acute pain, neurological pain. We met in 98, started living together in 99, and then married in the year 2000. He was a very special man. He was the love of my life. He passed away in January 2022, aged only 52. I'm giving away my age. This is the first time I've spoken about him and our relationship publicly since his funeral, so please bear with me. To the outside world, you wouldn't have known what Simon lived with. He was independent, fiercely, like a bear. He mastered what Finkelmaster and Marcus noticed in their study of independence and dependence needs as the routine of dependency, the skill of asking those around him for help. He had this down pat. Nobody knew how much he was actually living with, including me when I first met him. As our relationship developed, I learnt this routine of dependency and my role in it. I learnt quickly not to take over take over help or first jump in, only if asked, if things were about to go pear-shaped. For example, if he fell out of his wheelchair, was about to drop something, burn himself, pass out, to name some, and these needs progressively increased over time. So the first part of my carer's dance started like this, toing and froing, stepping forward, stepping back. Can I get the door for you? Oh, we're heading into a restaurant. Can I move those chairs? It was constant navigating of my environment to try and help his ease and independence through wherever we went. There's a curb, I have to lift him up. There's a curb, I have to drop him down. I have to hope that he doesn't bounce out of his wheelchair. Supporting that independence. So it's dependence, independence, dependence and independence, spinning in continual motion, fundamentally intertwined. We all enter our care journeys differently, disability through trauma, birth, ageing, mental and physical illness. Mine started with love. And as carers, love is the fuel that keeps us going, and we've heard that this morning many times. I entered into our relationship with my eyes wide open, and I promise I didn't steal that line from Heather this morning. I actually wrote it. I chose to be with him and walk alongside him in my life and his life. Maintaining independence was the priority in our relationship, and rightly so. It was a key word I heard repeatedly early on: independent living, rehabilitation, personal care and dignity. But Simon didn't want me to be his carer. He didn't want to be dependent on me to manage his disability. He wanted to maintain his personal care routine for as long as he could manage. So we agreed very early that I was not going to be his carer, which to us meant professional carer, that he would take care of his own personal needs, showering, toileting, etc., as much as he possibly could. He was a professional man, a teacher, and then injury prevention manager and presenter. This was essential to the essence of his being. Everything was geared to maintaining this. Life ticked along okay. He was the centre of his own dance. There was a depth of intimacy between us as I learnt to help intuitively in a way that valued his abilities and his autonomy. He trusted me first in his dependency, my ability to negotiate it, and that I understood his need for autonomy. That was my privilege. We worked well as a team. Our routine of dependency dance together was elite as we forged our heavily normalised life, fitting in together things that we wanted to do together and felt we should get out of life. He was national hand cycling champion for his ability level. He worked at PBF, and we had moved from Perth from Mandurah, where we had first met. I was studying to obtain my PhD, working in research. We were going through IVF to start our family. Over the course of 10 years, we were lucky enough to have our first, and then many years later, our second child. Our life seemed to be reasonably normal. Through it all, however, Simon was having surgery after surgery to help with continence and relieve constant and debilitating bladder infections, neurological pain, and to delay the deterioration of his spinal cord. We had a revolving door on the ED and called Murdoch our second home, where the nursing staff knew him by name. With over 40 hospitalisations during our time together, this was the other side of our normal life. He was independent and I was not a carer. To call myself carer meant for me that I would render him further dependent, the very thing that he didn't want, the very thing that went against the essence of his being. The binary of dependence and independence did not allow us an easy coexistence. For me to claim that dependency would take away his moral rights. What I didn't know then and what is clearer to me now, and something that we all need to gain clarity on, is this independence is a contextually loaded concept. Several authors who advocate for supporting interpersonal-based carer relationships argue that it is a predominantly liberalised ideology which defines it only in terms of the capacity to make one's own decisions. But doesn't this imply that a life might only be worth living when a person does not depend on others to meet their needs? From a carer's perspective, and Verkerk argues this strongly, that the independent, autonomous individual is an abstract, empty and unrealisable goal because the self is always embedded in relationship with flesh and blood. Holding independence, which we do, as the primary value from policy to service provision, to a deeply held and purposeful goal, neglects the intimacy that is born through our carer relationships, such as trust, care, contribution, and having mutual responsibility to each other to live in right relationship regardless of our levels of abilities. The notion of independence provided the foundation for us to step away from each other rather than to step forward towards each other in our relationship. It became a slow crack, which then built into larger, often irreconcilable tensions, where our language around his increasing needs and our ability to define it and deal with it, it failed. And then bigger things happen, and you don't just quite get things right. You don't understand what it is that you're looking for. You don't get the outcome that you're looking for. And this is a shout out to Reagan. I take my hat off to her. I think she's fantastic. She gave it a crack, which was good. Over the course of the next 6 years, Simon nearly died of acute peritonitis twice, suffered septicemia, pneumonia. He fell out of his wheelchair and hit the back of his head on the floor so hard that he had a frontal lobe bleed. He lost more feeling in his hands, and while his mobility deteriorated, his pain was getting worse. Things began to be difficult. He reversed his power chair out of his van. He was increasingly angry and depressed at home, where he felt limited the most. The emotional and psychological support, that invisible interpersonal relational support, was constant. And we don't talk enough about that. I can see that I was finding, now as I look back, the constant crises was difficult to navigate, especially around the surgeries, hospitalisation, pain and depression, and my own sheer angst of not being able to help his happiness or his well-being at these times, which rendered me helpless. This had a profound impact on my own mental health and well-being as I began to suffer high levels of anxiety. I was increasingly unreliable at work, a space that I had always kept for myself, but I couldn't keep up, but I felt I should. We were in this conceptual headlock, stuck in this idea that we were distinct autonomous beings reinforced by a medical system that speaks only to its patients. In our 24 years of being together, I was never asked how I was going, and this has been told to me by so many other carers who are in this room. There is no information on managing interpersonal care-based relationships, or if it is specific to a particular condition. We didn't fit that mould. We fell between the cracks. We didn't have a particular service. At the time, I was suffering my own burnout, combined with some menopausal madness, also did not steal that from Heather. And Simon's physical and mental health was deteriorating further. Right then, I needed help and I tried to find it. I accessed counselling, distraught, to be asked more about what my husband was experiencing and how his reactions to what was happening to him were completely understandable, absolutely understandable, and I agreed. But to be there in a better capacity for him, I needed to understand my own reactions and my own emotions in relation to his experiences. I needed to have permission to reach for the tools of my own self-care and then to teach my children to reach for theirs. Interdependency allows both in a carers-based relationships to be humans that are vulnerable and to each have the capacity for autonomy. And while it is still an ideal to be chased, much like independence, we can gain a better understanding of our carer selves as relational beings, and it embeds us in a language that is more conducive to self-care and well-being. It gives us a right to look after ourselves and to lead a full and productive life and care for the important people in our lives. To do this, we need to confront a few uncomfortable truths. That while relational and interdependent care approaches are necessary to autonomy, it is at the same time a dance of conflict. Some of these areas of conflict include that carers can sometimes be objectified by the person they are caring for, that the carer can become a means to getting their needs met, setting up a dysfunctional imbalance where the ability to articulate needs are hampered, withheld, or simply not met. There is a natural power differential with carer-based relationships, whether paid care or not, and when this is not acknowledged, it can make both parties or all parties vulnerable to manipulation and coercive control. Both parties. Culture has an enormous impact on the way we view ourselves and our own way of being. It is inseparable. Western liberalised culture takes an individualistic view of disability, ageing, health and mental health, and the funding models that follow. That it dissects our social and community connections, keeping interdependency as an ideal rather than a possible reality. It re-establishes, relegates the burden of care to the invisible, dichotomous lines that we draw between dependence and independence. For us, and we're all different, the NDIS supports were welcome to us. We received some services. We were, before that, completely self-reliant. And it was in our ability to work towards interdependency, that Simon was the one who took great care when he negotiated his package, being an intelligent and articulate man, that the services he provided were the ones that would support our family as a whole. I was lucky in this regard. And Carers Gateway too was an interesting question before, did offer some supports too, mainly in the way of counselling. And this is a bugbear of mine that quite often we don't reach out for help at the time that we need it. We wait until we're actually burnt out before we can actually put our hand up. So it is not useful to have counselling supports where there's a 6 to 8 week waiting list. When you need it now. And for the hardest one, we don't talk about death in any great detail in Australia. The changes in the VAD laws are slowly changing this. Talking about death significantly changed our relationship. I was not ready, and I was not well equipped to support him through it. I continue to work through that painful guilt because of this. While our loved person may be ready to die, we who are embedded in these real flesh and blood relationships might not be ready for them to do so, because with them, they will take a part of us too. Practicing self-care can only flourish through understanding the self in relation to the other in community. Understanding these nuances as the overarching big picture of self-care and practicing well-being helps us make sense of seemingly individualistic approaches like meditation or connecting with people when you really don't feel like it. Service providers need to wrap arms around other service providers to support those who don't fit and consider the whole relationship. Include the whole community to break down the barriers that prevent so many carers from understanding who they are and what they do. Offer places and spaces that provide for all wellbeing information, services and activities for the broader community. We need to show others how to care for carers, not only in the space of crisis, but also in the everyday minutiae of life where loneliness finds us. If you've taken your wellbeing into your hands, good on you, then keep going. If it is only just a vague thought that you need to feel better in your life and in your relationship, then keep going with that thought. Thinking about strengthening your wellbeing, the way you think about yourself in relation to your life, will lead you to the right place to take your first steps of action. Whether that be being an advocate, taking a walk down the beach, having a coffee with friends, or having a fun wine night with other mums, whatever it is that you need. But most of all, service providers and us all, we all need to listen. We need to listen to ourselves, we need to listen to others, and we need to practice self-care in your relationships. We do this on our own and together for ourselves and for our loved ones and for the well-being of our communities as a whole. Part of the grief process is telling your story. We grieve as carers all of the time. We're grieving daily for the small losses of the lives that we thought that we were going to have and that for whatever reason hasn't eventuated. Telling your story is part of a way of processing that grief. Find that space. I thank you for holding my story today because the carers' dance continues long after they're gone. Thank you.